Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Gwent. This week we're going to be taking a look at an unorthodox Nilfgaard reveal deck, and by unorthodox I mean that I didn't actually have some of the staples for Nilfgaard reveal, so I ended up improvising a little bit and it kind of worked out really well, to be honest. This deck has, instead of a lot of reveal, it does still have a fair bit of reveal. I think the total amount of reveals that you can have during a game with this deck is 14, which means that the spotters can be 18 strength when you put them down, boosted that is. So these are essentially our win condition. We'll play them all last and just outvalue our opponent almost certainly if it gets to the third round. But the way that it's unorthodox is that it actually uses a lot of card draw. And we're more than capable of getting all the way to the end of our deck and drawing the entire thing out. But what's fun about it as well is if we're playing against another deck that maybe thins out their own deck, so maybe they're playing John Calvé, who looks at top 3 bronzes and also uses Kerr as well in order to reuse that ability. If they're constantly thinning out their deck, we do have a chance of actually making them draw their entire deck, so things like Albrecht only draw us cards. I've had that happen a fair few times, in fact. You do, of course, have your 37 card Northern Realms decks that you don't stand a chance in hell of milling, but we essentially thin at the perfect amount in order to not overdraw ourselves, but that cannot be said about our opponent, which actually allows a little bit of disruption in this deck, where reveal doesn't normally disrupt. So, as we mentioned, if they're playing some sort of deck that uses a lot of thinning cards, so maybe we're against their own Nilfgaard deck and they've still got their Imperial Golems in the deck, they don't want to draw them. So by drawing a lot of cards with Albrecht and things like that, we actually force them to draw the cards that they maybe don't want to see. So Temerian Infantrymen from Northern Realms, maybe the Crones from Monsters, or even the Arrakis as well. If we manage to get all 3 Arrakis into their hand, then they've got a lot of what are essentially dead cards in their hand, and essentially redrawing's not going to be as valuable for them. They do, of course, get loads of extra draws, which does allow them to find their answers, but a lot of the times us drawing our answers tends to work out in a more powerful favour than it does for our opponent. As I mentioned, we want to get all 3 spotters into our hand for at least round 3 to take the victory there. And with the amount of draw that we've got available, that's easily possible. So, the amount of thinning that we do, I should mention, our leader is Morvran Voorhees as well. So when you spawn him, you get a 6 strength leader. And his deploy ability allows you to reveal 3 cards from either player's hand, and they can be golds as well. The ideal thing that we want to do is mulligan all of our Imperial Golems away, and we want to have all 3 foot soldiers in our hand. That's the ideal thing. Alternatively, we could have Fire Scorpions in our hand as well, are also good reveal targets. But if we don't have 3 of these in our hands, then we want to reveal our opponent's stuff so that we can get some extra information on them. That kind of thing. So our ideal turn 1 play is essentially have no golems in our hand, have all 3 foot soldiers in our hand. We use Voorhees to reveal all 3 of the foot soldiers, which gets all of the Imperial Golems out of our deck, gets all of the foot soldiers into play, and draws us 3 extra cards. So that is a huge point swing to lead off. A lot of the times I find that I can actually keep up with the usual monsters power swing, because they like to win in the first round as well. A play like that can actually allow you to keep up quite well against that kind of strategy. So we might win the first round, then we want to kind of draw a load of cards in the second round, and then have potentially up to an 18-point spotter ready to win in our hand on the third round, have all 3 of them available so that our point values just outmatch theirs altogether. So as we mentioned, the spotters, whenever a player reveals a card, so that's a symmetrical ability as well. So if we're against the mirror match, these guys, you can just think of them as effectively 4 strength units, short of them maybe having a Peter or something like that to reset the spotter's ability. You've got to be aware of that as well. Resetting spotters can be quite difficult, so towards the end game you might actually know what their hand looks like with all of the reveals that we'll be doing. So you can essentially play around some of their anti-spotting tech cards, as it were. So we then have Nilfgaardian Knights, yet again a really high-powered unit. It's a 10 strength unit on its own, and when you deploy it, it gains 2 armor as well. So a lot of damage spells are going to be able to protect the Nilfgaardian Knight. It's kind of good against weather as well, because it'll take the armor out first, which might actually buy us an extra turn in terms of points to force another card out of our opponent's hand. Because if we decide we don't want to win either the first or second round, we want to make sure that we get as many cards out of their deck as possible. So having an Nilfgaardian Knight is a nice little bit of protection from the weather, and it's also 10 points as well, which can force up to 2 cards out of our opponent's hand, depending on what they're playing anyway. Also, we've got ourselves some Fire Scorpions as well. Fire Scorpions are 6 strength units. Whenever this unit is revealed, you get to damage a random enemy by 3, and when you deploy it, you get to damage a specific enemy by 3, as long as it's not gold, of course. So, yet again, we want to reveal these guys first and foremost, so either use Voorhees or use Kerr as well. Kerr allows you to replay your leader ability, so essentially our leader can do 6 reveals, and then we've got Tibor revealing, we've got Albrecht revealing, that kind of thing, and our Nilfgaardian Knights revealing as well. Plenty of reveal. Also, Cynthia as well. So, where were we? Yeah, so you want to actually reveal these guys when your opponent's got some decent tech on the board. If you're playing against Skellige, and it looks like they're playing either Warcry or some sort of damaged focused deck using the Warcriers, then you want to avoid this as much as possible. But revealing a Fire Scorpion and then mulliganing it away in a future round so that it can be revealed again is really good tech there. So that's essentially all the bronzes. Let's have a look at our silvers, shall we? So usual auto-include for Nilfgaard is Orcs. Orcs is a 4 strength ranged unit, and when you deploy him you get to lock 2 units, which is pretty insane. And if they're enemies, you damage them by 1 as well. So you get a 2-point extra swing. It could be up to 6 power in terms of the swing in that sense. But being able to lock 2 units is quite often very useful. Just being able to lock 1 is really good as well. We then have Peter. So Peter is really good tech against Consume Monsters, which has been playing a lot of recently. You see it more in casual than you do in ranked, but Consume Monsters uses... what's their name now? The Catacans, I think they're called. Or is that the silver one? I can't remember. But there is the Consume monster with 3 strength that gets resilience, so it allows them to carry over some of their points into the next round. Peter actually resets that unit and then removes its strength by 3, which banishes that unit. So this can really work quite well against your opponent's carryover stuff. But also, if they're using maybe Axeman in Skellige, or maybe even a rival spotter if it's a reveal mirror match, then Peter comes in real handy for that kind of thing. It's really good. Next we've got Albrecht. Albrecht is a 9 strength siege unit, so when you deploy him, if neither player has passed, each player draws the top card from their deck and your opponent's card is revealed. So we both get to draw, and I get a reveal off of that as well. One thing that I do like to do with Albrecht is actually use Decoy on him as well. So Decoy returns an ally to your hand and boosts it by 3 and allows you to replay it. So anything that is not gold in our deck, we can essentially replay. The only things we really don't want to replay are any of these guys here. If you put a spotter back to your hand, it'll reset its power and then boost it, which you don't really want unless, of course, they've reset it already. And Imperial Golems and Dale and Foot Soldiers don't really do a great deal being returned. But if you imagine a decoy, that allows Orcs to toggle 4 units locks, or maybe even Peter allows to reset 2 units. So that's 2 carryovers for consumes, or it's 2 spotters in the mirror match, that kind of thing. There's a lot of reusable tech in here as well. Maybe even Cynthia as well if you want a double reveal. So Cynthia, when you deploy her on the ranged row, she's 5 strength. You get to reveal one of the highest units in your opponent's hand, including the golds, and then boost yourself by its power. So if your opponent's actually, for example, in a mirror match, you will end up revealing a spotter and boosting itself, and it practically just cancels that card out, which makes it really good, as long as your opponent can't reset it. And even if they do, then we decoy it, and we get to look at the second highest, or even tied for highest anyway, power, and get to essentially get an extra reveal trigger, which is an extra trigger for our spotters, but also allows us that extra little bit of information to know what the power swings are going to be like. We then have Van Hema as well. This is you know, a utility card in this deck. So Van Hema is a siege unit with 3 strength, and he's got 3 different abilities, which makes him really, really useful in this deck. So the first one is he allows us to use Biting Frost, which is a little bit nerfed in the newest update. So you apply Frost to a row on your opponent's side, and then every turn at the start of your turn, damage one of the lowest units on the row by 2. So it essentially does 2 damage every single turn. And you want to be using that if your opponent's got maybe one single non-gold unit on the board and you don't expect any more. You kind of want to weigh Biting Frost up against Stammelford Tremors. Stammelford Tremors damages up to 6 random enemies by 2. So if your opponent's actually a little bit wider on the board, then Tremors is likely to be the one that you use it for. This 9 times out of 10 is actually what I use Van Hema for, is that extra little bit of a power swing, essentially. Because he's 3 strength by himself, but if he gets to do damage 6 units by 2, that's 12 extra points that you're essentially swinging in your favour. So he's actually a lot more powerful than he looks. And as we mentioned, Decoy allows us to replay him again if we need to. He's also here as well as our only clear skies as well. Weather has been nerfed, so it's not too much of a problem, but if you end up getting maybe a Drought, a Ragnarok, or any of the other still good weather cards, maybe even Skellige Storm, that kind of thing, then Clear Skies allows you to get rid of that and essentially undo one of your opponent's cards, and then you can decoy it, replay it, so it's pretty sweet. Onto our golds, we've got Kerr as well. Kerr allows us for essentially an extra 3 reveals, either to our opponent's hand, or if we didn't manage to get all 3 Dalen Foot Soldiers into our hand and we drew one later, this allows us to target reveal the foot soldiers. So Kerr is really useful for that kind of thing. And if he doesn't have that kind of use, then we just point this at our opponent's stuff, reveal 3 cards from our opponent's hand, and we get to work around their little bit of information, making sure that we're essentially doing the right play at all times. We then have Avalak as well. This is one of the disruptive cards in a sense. It doesn't seem that way because it's so symmetrical and it can be useful for your opponents, but it completely depends on the matchup. So it's an 8 strength, loyal, agile unit, so we can play it on any row. And if neither player has passed, then both players get to draw the top 2 cards from their deck. Drawing extra cards for us does absolutely nothing but help us, but if you think about maybe Consume Monsters who haven't thinned out their Arrakis, or maybe Northern Realms, the 37 card one, which focuses very much on thinning their deck and getting all of their Blue Stripes Commandos out, their Temerian Infantry, that kind of thing. Forcing your opponents to draw all of the cards that they've maybe mulliganed away is really good. Maybe even get all 3 Crones into our opponent's hand for monsters, which practically kills that combo off as well, depending on when you end up using it. So that's an extra 2 cards. We also have Renew as well, which allows us to do it again. So resurrect a gold unit from your graveyard. This is currently in here because I didn't have a great deal of better options at the moment as far as Nilfgaard's concerned, but it has actually been working out very much in my favour. The amount of times I've won a game purely because I've used Avalak to make our opponent draw 2 cards. They've drawn maybe their Arrakis, and then I've renewed it the next round as well, and they've ended up drawing even more of the cards that they don't want to see. Is really useful to us, and it also allows us as well to get as deep into our deck as possible. By the end of most games, you've got bare minimum maybe 3 cards left in your deck, and maximum you've actually drawn all of the cards in your deck. Ideally, as a reveal, you want all 3 spotters, is essentially the thing, because they're actually getting boosted inside your deck whenever you reveal units. So, or reveal cards in general, should I say. So we want to find all 3 of these, because those guys are going to be insane amount of power. As I mentioned, it's going to be 18 as a best case scenario, probably about 14 to 16 normally. So having 3 14 to 16 power units in your hand ready for round 3 likely just means you win the game, short of some sort of anti-spot attack anyway. So it's really sweet. Next we've got Tibor Albrecht as well. So this guy is quite a good win condition for any Nilfgaard deck. So he's 8 strength on his own, which is pretty sweet. And you can play him on any row as well, which allows you to play around Gigny in a way. He is going to turn into a 23 power unit, so any row that you put him on is going to be able to be Gignied, or Geralf Ignied, Scorched, that kind of thing. So you've got to worry about that just a little bit, but the agile part of him allows us to make the most of that. But if neither player has passed, you boost him by 15, then your opponent draws the top bronze card of their deck and reveals it. So if you can imagine, best case, they hit an Arrakis, that kind of thing. The worst thing that they want to see, essentially, and you get a 23 power Tibor onto the board. That is gold and is very difficult to deal with. And once our opponent thinks, oh, our Tibor's gone, that must be our win condition, well, we've still got the Renew to bring him back in a future round. That's another 23 points on a Renew, so this is a really useful card in this deck. So that's essentially the deck list anyway, guys. If you did like the look of it, then be sure to check out the matches, like and subscribe and all that lot, and I'll see you in the games.